Affinity Publisher is one of my favorite desktop publishing apps. It's great for complex layouts and multi-page designs. And today, I'm going to be showing you how to get started. Hi, I'm Drew, and I've been teaching foundation studies and digital design at university for about 5 years. I've also been working as an illustrator and motion graphics artist for a little over 15 years. This is a tutorial for complete beginners, so don't feel like you need to have any experience. If you have questions or you just want to show off your work, I'd love to see you down in the comments. And with that, let's get started. Affinity Publisher is a great tool for multi-page layouts because it streamlines a lot of the workflow. You don't want to have to make the same edit to every single page of a presentation or a book individually. So Publisher offers us tools like the Pages panel and paragraph styles that really help streamline and automate some of that. Today we're going to be working on a trifold brochure so that we can explore some of those tools and get more familiar with what Publisher has to offer. If you'd like to follow along using exactly the same fonts, photos, and graphics that I use in this tutorial, I've put together a collection over at envatoelements.com. Envato Elements offers an immense library of everything from motion graphics templates and videos to even web design templates. The Publisher interface should be pretty familiar to anybody who's used other Affinity apps like Designer or even Adobe apps like InDesign. Up here we have our main menus like File, Edit, and Document. We'll touch on each of these menus as we go through the tutorial. For now, I just want to draw your attention to the Window menu. The Window menu controls the rest of our interface, which Publisher refers to as our Studio. I'm going to come down to Studio and then click Reset Studio. And that will clear away any changes that I've made to the interface so that my setup should be the same as what you have on a fresh install of Publisher. I'm going to go back up to Window and let's look at the different panels and how they're referenced in the Window menu. Anything that has a check mark next to it means that the panel is currently open. So if I go down here to Pages, we can see that Pages is open in our interface. And if I drag Pages out of its group and click the little gray X, back up to Window, we can see the Pages no longer has that check mark on it. If I click Pages again, it'll bring our menu back, and then I can just drag it back into its group. If you ever lose a panel, you can always find it here in the Window menu. One other thing I want to have a look at before we move on is the Help menu. If you're on Mac OS, Publisher does work with the interactive Help menu. So if you search for something, I'll go ahead and search for Pages. It'll pull up not only help topics, but it'll also show you any references to the word pages in the menu system. So we have add pages on the document menu, delete pages on the same menu, add pages from file, fields, total pages, and then we have pages itself, which we were just looking at in the Window menu. And we can actually go directly there, and we can see that it's got this little helpful arrow pointing directly to where it shows up in the menu. So if you can't find something, it's always helpful to just go straight to the search bar and type it in, and it'll show you exactly where to find it in the menu. Let's have a look at the command bar at the top. The first three buttons are our personas. Affinity Publisher handles personas a little bit differently than Designer and Photo. Instead of having a pixel persona and an export persona, for instance, Publisher has personas for Designer and Photo themselves. So we can actually edit files directly within Publisher without having to export them to Designer or Photo and then re-import them. So this is a really quick, handy way to make edits to photos and vector files right within Publisher. Next, we have our buttons to revert to defaults. After that, we've got some buttons that control text flow, which we'll be using quite a bit. This just controls how text flows around different images. After that, we have our toggle preview mode. This is a really handy button that just hides all of our rulers and lines and lets us see what the document will look like in its final printed state. After that, we've got the document title and our zoom level. Then we have our baseline grid manager to control how text lines up. Next, we have our snapping button, and clicking the button just turns snapping on and off, but if we click the drop-down menu, we actually have really great control over exactly what items snap together. So if we want things to snap to the document bounds or snap to the document grid, all that is controlled right here. We also have some presets for different activities. If we're doing page layout or object creation, there are presets for that already built into Publisher. And then finally, we have our layout buttons. The first set of kind of red-orange buttons control where things are in the layer stack. After that, we have our vertical and horizontal alignment, and this is actually a little drop-down button. After that, we've got flip horizontal and vertical and our rotate by 90 degrees, left and right. And then we have 3 green buttons that control where new items are inserted into the document. Right below the command bar, we have our context bar. And the context bar changes depending on what tool is active and what we have selected. I'm going to start with a rounded rectangle and just drag that shape out. And now on our context bar, we can see we've got all the controls for the shape. We have our fill and stroke. We also have controls for the border radius, since this is a parametric shape. If I go back to the Move tool or Select tool and hit V on the keyboard, we still have all those controls for the parametric shape. And now we also have controls for our Select tool, like our alignment. If I switch to the Node tool or hit A on the keyboard, we've lost those controls for alignment, and we still have our parametric controls for this rounded rectangle, but we're not seeing our controls for the Node tool because we can't really do anything other than resizing this while it's still in a parametric state. If I click Convert to Curves, now we have access to the nodes, and we can see we've got our full context bar for our Node tool. We still have the fill and stroke, but we don't have control over the border radius anymore. And instead, we've got controls for the Node tool itself. So if I click that node and then click Breakpoint, it'll let us open that curve up. As we go through this tutorial, we'll be using all these different tools, and it's always good to pay attention to what tool is active and what object is active over in the Layers panel, in case you're not seeing something that you think you should up here in the context bar. Everything in the context bar also exists within other places and other panels or in menu items. This just gives us a really quick way to get to things without having to jump around within menus. Now that we've had a look at the interface, let's go ahead and set up our document. We're going to be creating a trifold menu for an ice cream restaurant as our example. I'm going to go over to File, click on New, and it's going to open our new document creation panel. This might look a little bit different from yours, so make sure that you're in the Press Ready presets. And I'm going to be using the A4 preset. And you also want to make sure that you're using this horizontal orientation. By default, it's going to be a portrait format. We're going to use this horizontal format since we're going to be doing a trifold. Here in the spread viewer, we can see what the pages are going to look like next to each other. If we look down here in our layout section, I'm using centimeters. I'm going to leave the DPI set at 300, and this is going to control the resolution of any images or other raster graphics that we put into our document. Having it set at 300 makes sure that all of our images will print out nice and crisp, and we won't have any pixelation or blurriness when it goes to the printer. By default, it's also going to be set to image placement prefer linked, and we'll get into a little bit of the difference between linking and embedding images later, but I'm going to leave this set on prefer linked because it's going to keep our file smaller and it's going to enable us to swap images out and move things around. We're also going to leave the default master checked. Moving on to pages, we can leave all this stuff default. We also have a control for the format, and you can see that it's currently set to horizontal, so I'm going to leave that as is. Color should be set to CMYK 8, which is fine. Going to margin, we do want to include margins. I'm setting all of my margins to 1.5 centimeters. And I can click this little chain link icon to change all of them at once or change them individually. I want them all set to 1.5 centimeters though. This largely depends on your design and your printer. You'll want to consult the printer for any documentation that they may have for how close they can print to the edge of the page. Moving on to bleed. This, again, is information that's going to come from your printer. For this document, I'm going to set mine to 0.3 centimeters. We want to make sure that everything hangs over just a little bit if we want it to bleed off the page. So leaving these set at 0.3 centimeters. But again, you want to consult your printer for whatever size they may have for that. Okay, with all of that set up, I'm going to go ahead and click Create, and we have our new untitled document. Before we do anything else, it's always a good idea to save, so I'm going to go up to File, Save As, and I already have a folder that I'm going to put it in, and I'm just going to call it Publisher Tutorial. And we'll go ahead and click Save. And we can see we've got our nice clean page. Currently, we're looking at page 1. If we want to switch to page 2, we can double click on it here in the Pages panel. There is a bit of a bug as of filming, which if we use the spacebar tool and pan down to page 2, we don't see any rulers or guides or anything like that. For right now, it's best to just double click on the page, and that'll actually show you all of your guides and everything. Before we do anything else, I want to set up the master so that all of the pages in the document get some of the same styling. For instance, since this is a trifold, we're going to want to have 3 columns on each page. In order to do that, we're going to go into the master. This has already set up a master A for us. If we want, we can add as many masters as needed, so we can have masters A through Z if we want. For this document, it's going to be pretty simple, so I'm just going to keep some of the basic stuff on Master A. In order to edit the master, we just need to double-click on it, and you should see the full spread here. And you can see how the masters are going to apply. Everything on the right side is going to apply to our right side pages, so page 1 is a right side page, and everything on the left is going to apply to our left side pages. Page 2 is a left side page. It's laid out this way because we're using a facing pages document. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up our columns. I'm going to go up to the View menu and then go to Guides, and under Columns, right now it has 1. I'm just going to drag that up to 3, and you can see that we're getting 3 columns per page. And for the gutter in between the pages, I'm going to use the margin as kind of a reference size. Since I have 1.5 centimeters worth of margin, I want to have about 1.5 centimeters on each side of the columns. If I type 3 cm and then just click off of that, we can see that we get these nice chunky gutters here. I'm also going to leave the style for my columns as filled, but if you prefer, you can change that to outline. And with that done, I'm just going to click Close, but I want to add some rulers to show exactly where the folds are going to be. I already have rulers visible in my interface. If you don't see those, go up to the View menu and then make sure that Show Rulers is checked. You can also just hit Command R or Control R on Windows. So we can see with Command R, our rulers get hidden, and Command R, they bring them back. I'm going to bring out a ruler here, and I already have snapping turned on, so you want to make sure that your little magnet is turned on up here, and it's going to snap a ruler to that first column. It's not in the middle, but we'll fix that in just a second. I'm going to drag out a couple additional rulers here, so we'll drag one out for each of these columns and just snap it to the right side of that column. Okay, now that I've got the rulers in place, I just need to move them into the middle so that they're right between these columns. To do that, I'm going to go back up to the View menu, open up Guides, and we can see all of our guides here. And moving them over is really just a bit of math, but we can let Publisher do that for us. I'm going to double click on this to edit the value, and then I'm going to do Shift plus and 1.5. We can see it's going to move that ruler over by another 1.5 centimeters. I'm going to do the same thing with each of these. Hold Shift plus 1.5 and hit enter. We can see it's moved that second ruler over. And again, Shift plus 1.5. And the last one, plus 1.5. I'm going to go ahead and close my guides panel here. All right, now that we've got our guides, we're going to set up a wireframe. After that, we'll add some graphics. And finally, we'll add some detail to the entire thing. Let's switch back to page 1, and we'll start with what will ultimately be the front page of this trifold once it's all printed and folded up. That's going to be the right column on page 1. The back will be this middle column on page 1. There'll be this kind of interior page on the left column, and then page 2 will be most of our menu items and entrees and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to just start with a basic text box, and I'm going to use artistic text to just drag out the title. The title is going to be distinct from all of our other text styles, and I don't want to connect it to a specific paragraph style, so I'm going to keep that separate using artistic text. But for everything else, I'm going to be using a text box. We'll just call this ice cream, and I'll put a line break and call it restaurant. And that's all I'm going to do with the styling of that for now. We'll come back and add details a little bit later, but since this is the wireframe, we're going to keep it pretty simple for right now. Just below that, I know I'm going to have a graphic, so I'm going to create a space for that using this rectangle wireframe. So I'll use the rectangle wireframe and just fill that column completely with it. Once we add the graphic, then we can start to mess around with the actual size and scaling and all that good stuff, but for now we'll just leave it that way. On the back side of this, I know that we're going to have like an About Us section and some contact information, so I'm just going to use a frame text tool, which is the white text icon, and fill up that column. At the very top, I'll put About Us. I'll hit Enter, and I'll hit Enter again, and then put Contact Us. Now, I've created a blank space in the paragraph above Contact Us so I can insert some filler text. I don't know what the copy is going to be just yet, so I can right-click, go to Insert Filler Text, and that is way too much filler text, so once I've got enough, I'm just going to right-click again and click Expand Field. That'll stop it from inserting more filler text than we need. I can just delete a bunch of that, and I think I'll copy some of this and add another little paragraph right there. Okay, below Contact Us, I'm going to have a few phone numbers and things like that, but again, I'm going to use filler text for that, so I'll just paste, hit Enter, paste, hit Enter, and then paste. All right, now I'm going to start setting up a hierarchy for my text. I want to have headers, subheaders, paragraphs, and I want it to be visually distinct so that people understand where they're at, and it kind of helps visually organize the information. I'm not going to do anything with the fonts and the detailed stuff right now. I'm just going to get those text styles set up right now. So I'm going to go back up to the About Us and just click the cursor anywhere on that line. Since this is a paragraph style, it will apply to everything. And I'm going to go over to the Text Styles panel. I'm just going to drag that out. The way styles work is that they all reference another style. So we have a base style here at the top, and if we want to use the same font throughout the entire document, we can put that in the base style, and that will automatically apply to everything else that references it. So body, for instance, references the base style, and so does heading 1 and heading 2. For now, I'm going to set About Us as an H2. Heading 2, same thing for Contact Us. I'm going to set that as an H2. And this text in the middle, these paragraphs, I'm going to set that as a body. And same thing with this down here. We'll go ahead and set that as body. I know that the font here is a little bit larger than what we're going to use in the end, though. If I right-click on base and then click Edit Base, it'll start on style. I'm going to go down to font. I'm just going to change the font size to 10 points and click OK. We see that nothing changed though. And the reason is that body has its own font size applied. So if I right click on body and then click Edit Body, we can see that it has font size of 12 point as well. So if I click that dropdown and then set it to no change, now we can see it's getting that style from the base style. So let's go ahead and click OK to save that. And I'm just going to move the text styles back over into its group where it belongs. In the left column, we're going to have a tagline at the top and a nice big graphic just below it. So I'm going to create some space for that. I won't have this text box go all the way to the bottom. We'll just leave it at the top. I do have the tagline, so I'll go ahead and type that in. And this tagline, we'll go ahead and assign the heading 1 style. Below that, I'll go ahead and put in the placeholder for our picture. And now I'm going to try to really just get everything to align. So I know that these graphics will line up roughly, and I'll bring this guy down just a little bit so it's more centered in that space. And I'm also going to bring this text down just a little bit. Let's move on to page 2. We'll go into page 2 by double-clicking on it down here. So I'll start again with a text frame, and I'm just going to fill up that entire first column with text. At the top, we're going to put the heading for the types of ice cream that'll be in this column. This is going to be waffle cone ice cream. Now, below that, we're going to have images for each one of the ice creams, and we're also going to have below those then the titles and the price. So I'm going to go ahead and create some placeholders for my images. A quick way to make sure these fill up the entire column is to just drag them out so they fill the column. And then if I bring transform up here, our picture frame changes width and height. So we have our X position and Y position, and then we've got W for width and H for height. And I'm just going to triple click in here and do /2 for divided by 2. And now it's exactly half the width of that column. I can switch to my selection tool, and I'm just going to hold Option or Alt if you're on Windows, drag that over. I'll have to release Option so that I can get it to snap, but now we've got 2 images right there, and they fill up that column. I do want a little bit of gutter space between them, so to get that, I'm just going to hold Shift to select them both, scale them in from the right, and then I'll move this image frame over to the right side of that column. Now I've got a little space in between. Next, I'm going to assign these picture frames some flow options. I'm going to hold Shift and select both of those frames. I'll go up here on my command bar to the Show Text Wrap settings. And right now it's set to none. I'm going to change that to jump. That means that there will be no text on the same line as an image. As we move the images around the document, it'll move the text out of the way so it doesn't touch those images. Close. And just to see how that works now, if I move those images up, you can see how it's pushing that text around. So I'm going to go ahead and leave them right about there. I'll click back in my text box and double click to activate it. So we're typing in here, and I'll give it a line break. So just hit enter, and I'm just going to start putting in the titles of the ice cream. So we'll give this ice cream name. I'm just going to copy and paste this ice cream name as my filler text. A quick way to copy and paste things is to hold Shift, Command, or Control if you're on Windows, and hit the left arrow. And you can select things by entire words. So I'm going to do Command C and click the cursor at the end of this. Now I'm going to be using tab stops to format this text. Again, I don't want to use a table or a whole series of a bunch of different text boxes that I have to then go and resize as I try to change the font later. I want all this to change dynamically for me. So I'm going to use tab instead of space or return. And it's going to jump over, and we'll fix this alignment here in just a second. I'll go ahead and paste my text. So Command V to paste. And for these titles, I'm going to create a new custom text style for these. Let's drag transform back down into its group with history and navigator. And I'm going to bring text styles back up here. And I want a custom text style for this because if I apply heading 2 to this, it's going to contain all of the stuff that we set up with our tab stops. I don't want the tab stops to apply to other things with heading 2. So I'm just going to create a new paragraph style. We'll give it a name. I'll call this entree name. And we can set this so it's based on another style. And I'm going to set this to be based on the heading 2. So now I have the same font and size. I'm going to make this just a little bit smaller so I can click on font. Right now it's set to no change for font size. I'm going to set that maybe to like 12 points. All right, great. Now I'm going to click OK to accept that. And we've got a new paragraph style. So to add tab stops, there are a couple of different ways to do it. We can do it from the paragraph panel if we go into paragraph panel and then click tab stops. We can also do it from the text style itself. If we edit the entree name, we can go down in here and open a tab stops setting. But I like to use the text ruler for this because it's a little bit more interactive and just easier to see where things are going to be aligned rather than trying to do it by number. To see the text ruler, we're going to go up to View and go to Show Text Ruler. So the text ruler is just this little ruler that goes along the top of my text box. And to create a tab stop, I'm just going to click the cursor right at the start of that text that I want to move. Up on the ruler, I'm going to click once, and you can see it's created this little L icon, and that's our tab stop. I'm going to line it up so it's lined just to the left side of that image. This next line is going to be a little bit more complicated because we're going to have maybe some additional information or like another word, and then we're also going to have the price. So we're going to end up with basically 4 columns of text here. So we'll start on the left with filler, and then I'm going to hit tab and I'll add a price. I'm going to hit tab again and we'll type in more filler, and then tab one more time and we'll say this is worth $6. We're going to create another paragraph style for this, and we'll set the name to Entree Details. Now let's go ahead and fix our tab styles, and then we'll update those 2 paragraph styles. So on this one, I'm going to click the cursor right there just before our first price, and I'm going to drag that over so it's lined up with the right edge of this image. The problem though is that if I wanted to add more stuff to this, maybe I wanted to add decimal points, you can see it's bleeding over into the gutter. We don't want that. So we can fix that by changing the type of tab stop to be align right. I'm going to right click on the tab stop. Let's move text styles out of the way a little bit here. And we can see a few different options. The first one is align left and then snap center. That'll align the text right onto the center of the tab stop. And then we have align right, which will put the tab stop to the right of the text. And that's what I want to do with this one. So I'll click align right. We can see that now our text is all to the left of that tab stop. Let's move that tab stop over. We can also see now that the tab stop is facing the other direction too. So let's set up a couple more. I'm going to click right next to more filler. And this one, we also want to be a left-facing tab stop. But then on our last price here, we'll click yet again to add a tab stop. We'll right-click it, set it to right align, and then just move that all the way over to the end. And because this is using tab stops instead of being in a table, I can add images and move images around, and it'll move the text around to accommodate for me. Before we move on, we need to make sure to update our paragraph styles because we haven't added the tab stops to these paragraph styles. So I'm going to select this entire line. We're going to right-click our entree name, and we're going to update entree name, and that will just record all of our tab stops in that style. Same thing with this paragraph here. We'll highlight the entire thing by triple clicking, right click its style, which is Entree Details, and we'll do Update Entree Details. That'll take all the changes that we've done outside of text styles and just update that style to include them. I'm going to drag paragraph back over here to the character and layer panel where it belongs in text styles as well to get it out of the way. Now I'm just going to copy this text. So I'm going to select all of that, do Command C, hit enter, Command V, hit enter again, Command V. And now I'm going to duplicate these image rows as well. So let's go over to the selection tool. Hold Shift and select both boxes. And then just Option, click and drag so that they're below that title and details section. I'm going to do that again, Option, click and drag, so they're below the title and details section. And this is actually all set up for us to basically copy over onto column 2. So I'm going to drag a box around all of this, make sure that all of my placeholders are selected and the text box is selected. And then I'm going to hold Option and click and drag it over to this middle column. I'll have to release Option again to get it to snap. I'm I'm going to change the title of this. It's going to be ice cream sandwiches. All we need to do here is create our text box that's going to kind of go in the middle of everything over here. Let's go ahead and get the styles panel back over with its group. I'm going to create another text box. We'll give it a heading, and then I'll hit enter and just right click, insert filler again. We'll change that filler style to body. So just click body, and then I'm going to right click, expand field, and delete some of this stuff because we don't need all of that filler text. And I'll go ahead and bring that text box all the way down to the bottom and all the way up to the top. And we can set this up so that the text is actually just aligned right in the middle for us. Up here on our context bar, we can see our alignment kind of left and right, but then we also have a vertical alignment in this little dropdown. I'm going to click that, and I'm just going to set center vertically. I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of placeholders for the images that we'll put in here in the next step, and just make sure they fit there in the column. And we're good to go. Our wireframe is complete, and we're ready to move on and add some graphics to this. Okay, I'm back on page 1, and I'm going to start with the 2 large images that we're going to put on here. As I go through this, there'll be some repetitive work. So I'll explain what I'm doing the first time, and then the second time I'll kind of speed through it so that you don't have to watch me do the same thing multiple times. All right, to import our image, there are a few ways to do that. We can drag and drop them, but I like to use the place option from the file menu. If we go up to file and then click place, and you can see the shortcut for that is Shift-Command-M, which is what I'll be using as we go through this tutorial. I'm just going to click place, and that'll open up our folder where I have all the assets. I'm going to be using the waffle cone with pink ice cream image, so I'll click open. And since we already had that frame selected, you can see it places the image into the selected frame. Working with images in Publisher is a little different from Affinity Photo or Designer or Photoshop because the default behavior for images is to be clipped to a frame. Let me drag the layers panel out here so we can see what's going on exactly. We've got the picture frame selected, and the image is actually attached to that. It's grouped within that picture frame, and it's grouped such that it can't expand outside of the picture frame. If I want to resize the image and I have the picture frame selected, it's not going to scale the image up. It's actually going to crop and scale the image up. So it's a little bit of a different behavior. And we have a few different modes. If I right click on this, I can go down to frame properties, and we can set it to scale to max fit, scale to min fit, stretch, or size frame to content. If I do scale to min fit, the image is going to fit its smallest dimension to the frame. I don't want to do that. Let's just Command Z to undo. But I do want to move this image up a little bit, and I also want to reflect it or flip it so that we've got the arm coming in from the other side. To do that, I'm going to select the image itself inside of that picture frame. So when I select that, we can see that now we have the image active, and when we move this around, we're not scaling the frame, but we're scaling the image itself. So with that image selected, I'm going up here on the command bar. I'm going to click Flip Horizontal. And let's click back on the picture frame and look at some of these picture controls that we have here. These little arrows let us move the picture around inside the frame. This one lets us rotate, which I'm going to move this image up a little bit. Don't worry about the end of the background because we're going to be cutting the background out. And if I select the image, I can actually scale it up a little bit so it takes up just a little bit more space. Whenever you're scaling raster images up, you want to make sure that you're not losing detail to the point that they're going to be blurry when you print. You can always look up here on the top left part of that context bar to see what the actual DPI is. Up here it shows us what the resolution of the image is. So we've got 4004 by 6000 pixels. And then it shows us the working DPI. As that image gets bigger, you'll see that DPI goes down. So now that I've made it bigger, it's now only 685. I'm going to click Command Z to undo that. As long as this is above 300, we should be good to go. And even down to about 150 should be fine. Below that, you're going to start to get pixelation. It's not going to look great when it prints. So how do we get rid of this background? Let's drag the layers panel back to its group. I'm going to open this image inside of Photo, but I'm not going to go to Affinity Photo to do that. I can just use the photo persona here in Publisher. So let's select the image. I'm going to go up to Photo Persona, and we can see inside the Photo Persona we still have all the same layers, but these are the same tools that we would get in Affinity Photo. I want to select the ice cream and the hand here, so I'm going to use this paint selection. I'm using the drawing tablet to make this a little bit easier because this selection tool does respond to pen pressure. I'm going to be using this paint selection tool, and I'm going to speed through the selection process a little bit so that you don't have to watch me sit here and get all of the little details and all the little nooks and crannies. All right, I've got a pretty good basic selection, but I've got some things that I didn't mean to get, and I want to get rid of those things. I'm going to zoom in here on this little triangle. Up here on the top left in our context bar, we can see there are two different modes for the selection tool. There's Add, which is the default, what is on right now, and then there's Subtract. So if I change this to Subtract, I can go in and remove some of this stuff. I don't actually have to switch modes though. I can just use the keyboard shortcut Option to temporarily switch mode. So for the fingers down here, I'm just going to hold Option and Paint to get rid of some of that stuff. Once we've got a pretty good selection going, we can refine it using the Refine option up here in the context bar. Let's zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to hold Option and use the mouse wheel and click on the Refine button. The Refine panel gives us a few different preview options for our selection. So we've got Overlay, which is the default. We can also look at different mattes like black matte, white matte. I like the black and white quite a bit because it shows us all these little kind of soft edges where the selection tool wasn't really sure what it should get. I want to make sure that anything over the subject, like the fingers here, is going to be completely white and the background should be completely black. We can use the adjustment brush. I'm going to set it to foreground, and I'm going to change the preview back to overlay. With that foreground active, I can paint in the selection a little bit more. We can get rid of some of the stuff that it's added by changing to background, and I'll just paint that background out, click apply, and now we have a selection, and we can use that selection to apply a mask. So with the image selected over here in our layers panel, we'll drag that off so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to click the mask layer button, and then I'm just going to click mask. And we can see that it's gotten rid of all of that pink background. Masks are great because they're non-destructive. We can always go back and paint a little bit more white to add more to the foreground, or paint a little bit more black to add to the background. We haven't deleted that information, it's still there. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. I'm going to hit Command 0 to zoom back out so I can see the entire page. We'll drag layers back over to its group, and I'm going to go back to the Publisher persona. Okay, here in Publisher, I'm going to click the picture frame, and we can move the image around a little bit. For this right column, we'll place an image using the keyboard shortcut, so I'll do Shift Command M, and this one I'm going to place this ice cream with a blue background. So we'll click Open, and it's going to place that in the box for us. And just like the other one, I want to make sure that this box extends off to the edge of the bleed, and I want to get rid of the background. So I'm going to go into the photo persona. There's a little bit of a bug with the photo persona though, in that it won't mask anything that's outside of the document bound. So anything in that bleed area it's going to ignore. One way around that is to just make your image a little bigger than you think you're going to need, and make sure that the box is entirely within the... Now I'm going to make the mask the same way that I did before with that selection tool. So I'll select the image in the picture frame, go over to my paintbrush selection tool. We'll refine the selection. I'm just going to check on a black matte, paint in some foreground. Let's check on a white matte. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and click Apply. Just like before, I'm going to click the Mask button to mask it, and then we'll do Command D to deselect. We can see if I make the image smaller though, we still have that little blue band right there. To get around that, I'm just going to right-click the image and rasterize and trim. Now, when you do this, it's going to throw away all the extra resolution that you had. So this image on the left, for instance, was way larger than we needed it to be. And when we select it, we can see that it's 715 dpi. That's way larger than we need. This one, though, even though it was larger when we brought it in, now it's set to 300 dpi. When we rasterize it within the software like this, it's going to throw away all that extra information that it doesn't need over and above 300 dpi. So if I were to make this image larger, it's going to start to get pixelated really, really quickly. But I can always make it a little bit smaller. So because of that bug, it's a bit of a workaround, but it's a pretty simple workaround. So we'll be using it for a couple of other images on page 2. I'm going to go back to the publisher persona, hit Command 0, and I'm going to make this frame a little bit smaller, holding Shift to keep it proportional. I don't need to worry about this bleeding off on the right side, but I do want to make sure it bleeds on the bottom. So I'll align it with our bleed line on the bottom. Let's move on to page 2 and start adding some of the images for our entree item. So after double clicking on page 2, I'm not going to select any of the boxes this time. I'm just going to make sure everything's deselected, hold Shift, Command, and press M. And I'm going to select a whole bunch of items at once. We'll get all of those. I'm going to hold Command and select that one and that one. All these individual items, we'll get those. And I'm going to click Open. Since I didn't have any box selected, it's going to give me the option of placing each of these images in the box where I want it to go. We can see on the left side, it's got a stack of images, and the one at the top is going to be the next one that we placed. It'll also show us a little preview of what the image is going to look like in that box. I'm going to go ahead and just click into the places where these should go. Now, I don't have quite enough assets to fill this up. We can go ahead and duplicate some of these. I'm going to select this picture frame, right-click it, and go to Frame Properties. We'll do this one Scale to Min so that we can see the entire image there. And I just want to make sure that nothing's getting clipped off the edge. And that one looks like it could be a little smaller. I'll right-click, Frame Properties, and then Scale to Min. To copy these images, all I need to do is select them in the layer stack. So let's bring layers over, and I'm going to find the one that I want. I think I'll use this ice cream bowl here. I'm going to do Command C to copy it. And I'm just going to click this frame, then right-click and paste as content. Paste as content adds it to the picture frame, but we can see it's a little bit stretched. Not a problem. We'll just right-click and Frame Properties, and then Scale to Min Fit again. I'm going to use this image up here at the top. When I do this, though, I want to make sure that I'm selecting the image and not the image or the picture frame. So we'll select the image clipped to the frame, do Command C, select this frame down here, right-click, and then paste as content. And again, Frame Properties, Scale to Min Fit. We'll do the same thing with this last box here. So I'll select that one, make sure that I've got the image, do Command C, select that box, right-click, paste as content, right-click again, Frame Properties, and Scale to Min Fit. Okay, let's drag layers back over to its group where it belongs. I'm going to hit Command 0 to see the entire page again. The images in this right column are going to be a little bit different, and we'll see why in just a second. I'm not going to use the frames that I've placed for them. Instead, we're going to be bringing the images in, editing them, and then placing them around the text. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect everything by just clicking out here in empty space, do Shift Command M. We're going to be using this picture of a whole bunch of ice cream cones all in a row. Just click Open. And rather than adding it to a frame, I'm just going to drag out from the very top of the document all the way out across to the other side. So we get really, really big picture here. And in fact, I'm going to scale this up even larger by holding Shift and just dragging that bottom one down. So we'll make sure those are nice and big. And since I'm going to be rasterizing them, I don't want them to be too small. Right now we have 517 dpi, so we got plenty of information to work with, but once we rasterize them, we're going to throw that away. So let's go back into the photo persona. I'm going to be using the flood selection tool. So I'm just going to click and drag. We want to make sure that we get that entire ice cream cone. So we'll just increase the tolerance by dragging up until we get a good selection, and we'll release it. Now with that selected, I'm going to duplicate this image because I'm going to be using a couple of different ice cream cones from it. So I'm going to right-click, duplicate, and let's go ahead and hide that copy that we just made. And I'm going to click Mask, mask again, so that it applies. Now what I want to do is go ahead and rasterize and trim this mask. Right-click that image, rasterize and trim, and now we've got just the ice cream cone by itself. So let's do the same thing with that other layer. I'm going to go ahead and hide this green one, bring this one back up. And with this one, I'm just going to select that duplicate layer, and using the brush, I'll paint a selection on here. Again, I'm going to mask the image. So we'll click the mask button, click mask, and then again, right click and do rasterize and trim. And then I'll do Command D to deselect. Let's bring back that other green ice cream cone that we had before. And let's go back into the publisher persona. So with this image selected, let's go up to show text wrap settings. Right now it's set to none. I'm going to change that to tight and then just click close. And we can see as I move this around, all the text is moving too. So let's move it over here and we can see how it basically is forcing the text to follow the shape of that ice cream cone. We'll do the same thing with this one. We'll open up text wrap settings, set it to tight, and click close, and then move this one down here. So I want these to kind of be tilted here. Let's hold space and zoom in on this column. I can go ahead and delete the frames because I won't need those anymore. And I'm just going to kind of rotate and scale these until they fit around the text. And if I even add more text here, and we'll just press enter and hit Command V, it'll still flow around that. We just want to make sure that we avoid any issues like this where we've got a word separated from the rest of it. So I'm going to scale this ice cream cone down just a little and maybe scale this one up. All right, we're back on the first page and let's go ahead and add a couple of icons for our contact information. I'm going to go up to File, Place. We'll grab the social media icon, hold Command, grab the telephone icon and the mail icon. And I'll just click open to bring those in. I'm just going to drag a little box right there and drag another one about the same size and another one about the same size. Let's zoom in on those. So I'm going to use the trackpad and pinch and zoom. So I can hold Shift to scale these up. Click on the alignment button up here and we'll just align them all to center. Click apply. They're a little bit big, so I'm just going to hold Shift and scale them down slightly. I want to make sure the text moves to the side for them. So we'll select all of them, go up to our text wrap, and this one we're going to do square. So we'll click close. We can see now it's moving the text over. Let's zoom in once more, and I'm going to line this one up with that line of text and line this one up. And then I can select all of them with Shift, go back to the alignment panel. Align vertically, we can set it to distribute or space vertically. Go ahead and click apply. I want to give it a little bit more space, so we'll click back into our text wrap settings. And on the right side, we want to give it just a few more millimeters of space. So I'm going to click in there and just use the arrow and click close. I'm going to hit Command 0 to jump back out so we can see the entire page. And before we get too far into aligning things and setting up the size of our font, I'm going to go ahead and activate baseline grids. So I'm going to click this button for the Show Baseline Grid Manager. Right now, we're not using a baseline grid. And what a baseline grid does, if I go ahead and turn it on, and then I'm going to click the Show Baseline Grids, is it gives all of the text across the entire page lines to stick to. In our case, since this is a trifold and you can potentially open it up and see the entire page all at once, I'm going to go ahead and use these because it just makes sure that everything is nice and lined up. But we can also see here that we've got a little bit more space between each of our lines here, and it's actually pushed that text down quite a ways so that our icons no longer line up with it. So let's go ahead and move these back down where they're supposed to be. If I zoom back in on this, we can actually get them to stick to the baseline grid. Let's turn off the Show Baseline Grids so that we're not looking at all those lines. Go ahead and click Close. Now that we've got some pictures, we've got a good layout, let's go ahead and start adding some fonts. I've downloaded a couple of fonts that we're going to be using, Visby and Rubik. Visby is a font available from Envato Elements, and I'll have a link down in the description for that collection where you can find all of these assets. Rubik is actually a Google font, and I'll provide a link in the description for that as well. Let's start with Visby, and when you open this up, you'll see a whole bunch of different files. Depending on the type of font, sometimes you might see a whole bunch of files like this, where they're all OTFs, or you might get a whole bunch of TTF files, as in the case of Rubik here, where we go into the static and we see a whole bunch of separate files. Or you might see one of the newer fonts, which is TTF, and it's a variable weight. And that means that all of the different weights, they're all included in this one file. I already have these installed, so I'll just go through the process with you on Rubik and show you how to get them installed. To install a font on Mac OS is largely the same as installing it on Windows, but some of the terms are going to be a little bit different, like font book is only on Mac OS, but Windows has its own font manager. So I'm going to right-click these, click Open, and even though I have two selected, it'll go ahead and tell me that it's installing both of them. And we can see a little drop-down where we get all of those different options that are being installed at once. For me, since I already have them installed, it's going to give me the option for keep both, skip, or replace. And I've got this validation issue telling me that they already exist in Fontbook. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this, and I'm going to go ahead and quit out of Fontbook. You'll want to do the same thing for Visby or whatever other font you decide to use, but I'm going to go ahead and go back into Publisher and start assigning these fonts to some of our styles. Since I already have the styles set up, it's going to be easiest to set these fonts right in the text styles panel. I'm going to drag text styles out, and we'll go ahead and start with heading 1. So I'm going to right-click heading 1 and go to Edit. Let's start with font. We want to change the font family, so all of our heading 1 should use Rubik. And for the font traits, or you may see this under font weights, we're going to set this to bold. We'll leave the font size at 20 and go through some of the other options just briefly. We're not going to change the color or decorations, but if we wanted an underline or a strike through or to put an outline box around it, that's where we would go. Position and transform is great because some of these are a little bit close together. We can adjust the tracking and fix that. So I'm going to go ahead and boost the tracking just a little bit. And we may need to come back and revisit that later. I'm going to go to capitals real quick. And for this heading, I do want to go ahead and set this to all caps. This is a really handy tool because I don't have to go back and retype all of my titles. And we can see that most of our spacing issues are already resolved. Speaking of spacing, let's go ahead and go down to the spacing section. Instead of having this aligned center, I want this to be aligned left. We can also set the space before and after. For now, I'm going to leave those alone. I'm going to go back up to font since I changed this to all caps, and I do want to make this just a little bit smaller so they all fit on one line. So instead of 20 points, maybe down to 18 points or even 16 points. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And I'll just take this text box and move it down so it kind of aligns with the top of my graphic over here. I'm going to do something similar for our heading 2. So right-click heading 2, and then edit. And this one I'm going to also set to Rubik, and also set the font traits to semi-bold. I'm going to give this just a little bit more space between each of the letters because I can see they're really crammed together. So I'm going to go to Position and Transform, and just increase the tracking. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Finally, I'm going to edit the base style so that I can apply the Visby font to everything else other than these headers. So I'm going to right-click Base, Edit Base, and then in font, instead of Arial, we're going to set that to Visby CF, and you can see it's applied to our paragraphs. We also need to move our little icons around, but that's all right. So now I'm going to click OK. Let's go on to page 2 and see if anything is broken. All right, on page 2, some of these have gotten pushed up a little bit. So we've got the titles above the images on this last row, but otherwise it looks pretty good. I'm just going to grab the images in this last row, holding Shift, drag them up so that they're above the names. Same with these images in the second row. We'll drag those up, and these images in the first row. All right, now that we've got the basic paragraph styles done, we want to create some character styles. In the hierarchy of styles, we've got the no style or a group, which would be our base. We've got the paragraph styles, which apply to entire blocks of text. And then we've got character styles, which can modify paragraph styles. So for instance, I want to make these headers here yellow, but I don't want to make the headers on the front page yellow. So to do that, we can create a character style. I'm just going to select all of this text, and we'll drag the color panel down so we can see it. And I'm just going to drag these sliders until I get kind of a nice orangey yellow. Let's go over into the character panel. I'm going to drag that out. We can see where our color is applied right here. And we can also see up at the top, we've got the fonts, we've got the size, we've got the weight, and then we've got here where it says no style. This is our character style. I'm going to click the drop down and click new style, and we'll just call this entree header. We'll click OK. And now I can select ice cream sandwiches and either go into the drop-down list and select the character style there, or I can go into my text styles over here, and we can see down at the bottom, we now have our entree header. Let's go ahead and dock the color panel. The prices already have the entree details paragraph style applied, so if I tried to apply a different paragraph style, it would ruin all of our tab spaces that we've done. So I'm just going to apply a character style. We'll use a color similar to what we used for the title. I'm going to use the eyedropper. We'll just drag that up to the ice cream sandwiches and then click that color to apply it as the fill. Instead of regular, we'll make this extra bold. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a new character style. We'll call this prices. So make a new style, call it prices, and click OK. And I'm just going to apply that character style now to all of the other prices. So we've got prices there. Now that we've got the character style applied to all of our prices, let's go ahead and dock the character panel back over here and our text styles as well. Before we move on to start adding some graphics here, I just want to look really quickly at the Find and Replace panel. Let's go up to Window and go to Find and Replace. And for instance, I want to remove all of the decimal places from all the prices here. So in the Find and Replace menu, I can type in period 00 and click Find, and it's going to find all of the prices. I want to replace with nothing, so I'm going to replace all, and we can see that it's gotten rid of all of those 0.00s. Next, I want to replace all the 0.50s and do the same thing. We'll find and replace all. And so now we just have a single digit for the price. All right, I'm going to close Find and Replace. Just drag that off and click the X. Let's double click on page 1 to open that back up. Now we just need to do the restaurant name. So let's go into character. I'm going to search for Rubik by just typing in R bold. We also want to make sure that this is all caps. So here in the character panel, we can find that by clicking the 2 uppercase T's so that it's all caps. I'm going to select restaurant. We'll change that to light. And we'll go ahead and make that just a little bit smaller. So we'll set that to like 30 points. I'm going to scale the text down so it fits into our column. And then I'll just select restaurant, and we're going to give it a little bit of tracking. So I can click and drag on this icon, span the tracking out so we take up the full column. All right, let's go ahead and start adding some color to this and breaking up our text. I'm going to start with a rectangle to identify this back from the front. So let's go ahead and create a rectangle shape. Over here on the left, we've got our rounded rectangle tool. I'm going to click and hold on that and just get to regular rectangle. And then click and drag all the way from the bleed on the top to the bleed on the bottom, and make sure it covers all the way to those fold lines. And let's go ahead and bring out our color and our swatches panel so we can see both of those at the same time. I'm going to be setting up a color scheme for this, and there are a few ways to set up swatches in Publisher. My favorite is to use what's called global colors. The difference between global colors and regular swatches is that anything that has a global color applied to it will change when we change the swatch. So if I wanted to change all of the things that were blue-green, for instance, I would just need to change the swatch itself, and everything else throughout the rest of the document would all change. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll give this kind of a blue-green color. And I'm thinking I want to go ahead and make this a little bit darker than the background. And while we're doing that, we can go ahead and set all of our text to be white. All right, now that I have this blue-green color set up, Let's go ahead and create a swatch. First, I'm going to need to create a group for the swatches. So I'm going to click this little drop-down panel, and we're going to add a document palette that'll be available to all of our different personas throughout this entire document. We'll just call this ice cream, and hit OK. Now we've got two buttons here, one for add current fill to palette and one for add current color to palette as a global color. We want to make sure that the color we want is currently active. So right now we've got a stroke, which I actually don't want a stroke, so I'm going to click that little cross out button to get rid of that. But then I'm also going to click the foreground color, the fill color, to make sure that it's active. Now I can click this button for add as global color. And let's go ahead and do the same thing with the orange that we used for that text. So I'm going to deselect this because I don't want to make it orange. We'll click that so it's active. You can go ahead and apply that as a global color. Let's add a couple more global colors while we're doing this. I'm going to want a pink, probably something kind of a magenta, and I'll add that as a global color. I'm also going to want kind of a light gray, so I'll get rid of all the colors and just give it kind of this light gray, and we'll add that as a global color. And I think I'm also going to want something kind of yellow, so we'll bring that yellow slider over. We'll add that as a global color. So those are all the colors that we'll need for the shapes as we add them. Let's go ahead and start doing that over in the designer persona. I'm going to drag color and our swatches back over to the group, and then up here on the command bar, switch over to the designer persona. I'm using a pen tablet, and I'm just going to draw some kind of swirly shapes. I'll explain how that's going to work and then just kind of speed through it. I'm going to be using this vector brush, and with the pen tablet, we have it currently set to none. I'm going to change that to pressure. We're going to get a color, and I'm just going to use one of the swatches I already have set up. Say that magenta. Width we don't need to worry about because we're not going to be using a stroke, but I do want to use a stabilizer. And right now I've got this set to a window stabilizer. We have a rope and a window stabilizer, but for this I want these nice kind of really smooth curves. And I've got it set to 26, which is a decent size that should give me a nice smooth stroke as I draw some of these shapes out. Okay, now that I've got the curves in place, I'm going to take all these curves and close them so that I can go ahead and give them a fill. I'm going to hold Shift, select all the curves, switch to the node tool over here on the left, and click this little button on the context bar for close curve. It's created all these straight lines, and I just need to do a little bit of cleanup so that they all kind of go off the ends of the document. So for each one of these, I'm going to click once to make a corner. Just make sure that it goes outside of the bleed area. Now that I have the shapes, we can start applying some colors to them. Right now they have strokes, but they don't have fill colors. So I'm going to go through these and apply some colors from foreground to background. This larger shape here will be a background color, so let's go ahead and get rid of the stroke, make foreground active, and we'll set it to light gray. We can see though it's on top of everything else, so I want to make sure to send it back behind all of these other strokes. So I'll drag that down underneath. I'm going to do that with all of the larger shapes first. So let's go to the selection tool. We'll grab that one, and just drag them in the layer stack so they're underneath everything else. We'll go ahead and turn off the stroke and then give it a nice light gray fill. I want to show you how to do a compound path. I've got this shape in the very top corner, and then I've also got this kind of swirly below it. I actually want this to cut out this yellow shape underneath it. There are a couple of different ways to do booleans in Affinity Publisher and Affinity Designer. And the most obvious one is to use these buttons right here on the top, but these are destructive. So when you merge two shapes together using these, you can't go back and edit them because now it's become one vector shape. I'm going to hold Shift and select both of these. So I've got the top and the bottom, and then I'm going to go up to Layer and create Compound. This is different because it creates a live Boolean operation, and it's done it inside of this compound group. So if I expand that out in the Layers panel, we can see we've got our curve, and then we've got our curve underneath. And all we need to do is change the operation over here on the left. Right now it's set to add. If I click that, I'm going to change it to subtract. And we can see now that shape, wherever we put it, is going to be cutting out the shape underneath it. There is one caveat to this, and we can't control the fill color of these shapes that are inside the compound. If we want to change the fill color, we have to select this compound path and change it here. I'm going to go ahead and leave that yellow, but instead of having this gray one go all the way to the border, I'm just going to bring that in so it's underneath this kind of swirly shape here. Okay, now I want to move some of these things around in the layer stack. Let's go ahead and bring our layer stack out so we can see all this stuff that we've got. I want this gray shape to be underneath everything else, including our green rectangle. And a quick way to do that is to hold Shift Command and then use the left bracket, and that'll send it all the way to the back. I can do the same thing with this gray shape here, Shift Command, left bracket, and we can see it's gone all the way to the bottom of our layer stack. I actually want this picture to be on top of everything else, so I'm going to do Shift Command right bracket to bring it to the front. Let's go ahead and move over here. We want to make sure our title obviously is on top of everything else, so we'll do Shift Command right bracket to bring it up in front of the pink shape behind it. And actually, let's go ahead and move this pink shape up a little bit so it's not interfering with our title. We also want this ice cream picture to be in front of everything, so I'm going to do Shift Command right bracket to do that. We'll set this gray shape to the back. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and move this yellow and blue-green shape in front of the ice cream. So we'll do Shift Command right bracket for those, but I'm just going to move them down a little bit. Okay, we've got some shapes on our front page. Let's go ahead and dock the layers back on the group, and let's go ahead and do the same thing on page 2. To get to page 2, I'm going to go back into Publisher Persona, double-click it, and then go back into Designer Persona. I'm going to do pretty much the same thing to create some shapes on this page, so I'll just speed through that as I go. All right, we're almost done, but I want to have a look at one small little issue with a quick fix. Let's zoom in on this picture here. Most of these pictures look fine because they're on a white background, but it's not a transparent background. And so when I start putting shapes behind it, we can see that that's an issue because now we can see the outline of the photo. There are a couple of different ways to address this. One would be to put the image behind the shape. Another would be to cut the image out completely, but that takes a lot of time. A quick way to address it is to just select the image. We'll go into our layers panel here and change its blend mode. So instead of doing normal, we'll set it to color burn. And if we have the image over that shape, we can still see through it. That's not great. But as long as it's just the background like this, there's no problem. We're not seeing the shape anymore. So it's a kind of a quick fix, but one that's worth knowing to save some time. Let's zoom out and go ahead and dock the layers panel. And we are ready to go ahead and export this. Let's go back to the Publisher Persona. And I'm going to go back to page 1. Up here on the command bar, I'm going to click the toggle preview mode so we can see what it's going to look like when it's printed. And that all looks fine to me. Let's double click on page 2. All right, looks good. So before we can export this and print it, we need to do what's called a Preflight. I'm going to go up to the window menu and open the Preflight panel. We see a bunch of spelling mistakes all related to our filler text, but we don't need to see those. So I'm going to click this little drop down. We're going to go to Edit Profile, and here under Spelling, we'll just turn that off and click Close. So now we can see only the problems that we do need to address. First is non-proportional scaling, and that means that our image is not exactly proportional. It's gotten squished a little bit. If I double click on this, it'll show us which image that is. Let's go into Layers. I'm going to select the picture frame. I'm right-click it and go to Frame, Scale to Max Fit. Now our issue is gone, but our image is a little bit too small. So we'll just drag this down a little bit, select the image, and then scale that back up. I'm also noticing here a problem that doesn't show up in our pre-flight list, and that is some text is hidden. So I need to make sure that the text box in this column is on the top. Let's scroll through our layers, select that text box, then do Command-Shift right bracket to make sure it's on top. We'll go ahead and change the color of that text too while we're at it. Let's address the next issue we see here, and that's overflowing text frame. I'm going to double click that, and it's taken us to this text frame where we have all of this extra filler text. And we can see this little red icon means that there's text beyond the bounds of the frame. If I expand this frame out, we can see there's even more text. In this case, since it's just filler, I can go ahead and delete the extra text, and that will solve our problem. But if you can't get rid of your copy or can't make the copy shorter, you may need to either move your images that are kind of pushing it around. You might need to change the font size, although that's kind of a last resort because you want to keep your font size the same across the entire document. You don't want to have this font really, really small while this font is a little bit bigger. Try to keep your font sizes consistent. Let's hit Command-0 to zoom out again. And we can click Check Now, but since it's doing a live check, it's not going to come up with anything else that we need to worry about. So let's go ahead and export this. I'm going to go up to File. We can go to Export. By default, it's going to export as a PDF. We have a bunch of different options for different image formats here, but we're going to stick with PDF because that should work with most printers. Under Preset, it's set to PDF for print. I'm going to change that to PDF Press Ready, and that's just going to make sure that all of our colors are set to CMYK, which they should be already. Raster DPI means that any areas that are using vector effects or like drop shadows will need to be rasterized, and it's going to rasterize them at 300 DPI. That's fine, that's perfect for printing. We don't need it to be any more than that, so we'll go ahead and leave that as is. I'm going to go ahead and include the bleed area because I know that I want the images to flow off. If I turn that off, then it's going to crop the images right up to the bounds of the document. Right now it's set to all spreads, so it's going to include all of the pages and the spreads in our document. Let's scroll down here to rasterize. Right now it's set to unsupported properties. We could change it to everything, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it on unsupported properties. That again is anything that's like a vector effect, like a drop shadow, that it can't convert to PDF as a vector. It's got an option for downsample images, and we're going to leave that turned on. What that's going to do is downsample images will take any images that we have in the document that are too large. So most of the images that we had, because they're nice and high res, it's going to downsample those so that we're not including any extra resolution that we don't need. So for instance, that image that we had on the left that was like 4,000 pixels across and had a DPI of like 715 or something, it's going to rasterize that so it's down at 300 DPI, and we're not including this massive image blowing up our file size unnecessarily. We can change that to rasterize things that are larger. So anything that's above 375 DPI, it will rasterize. But if it's under 375, it won't downsample that. It'll just leave it at 375. The DPI that it's going to downsample to is 300. We'll go ahead and leave that enabled. And we can go ahead and leave allowed JPEG compression enabled. Since this is going to our printer, that's fine. If I was going to archive this, I would probably want to turn off JPEG compression because JPEGs are lossy. And if we save our PDFs with a bunch of JPEGs in them, those JPEGs will start to get worse and worse and degrade in quality over time. But if you need to save space and you need to make the file smaller, using JPEG compression and adjusting the quality is a good place to start. Color space we'll leave as CMYK. I don't have any hyperlinks, but if this were a presentation or I was sending a digital copy, we could actually include hyperlinks and interactive elements in this, but I don't have any of those, so we'll go ahead and leave that out. And most of these other options are something that you might want to consult your printer about, and will really depend on the printing company that you use. Something that I like to include is bleed, but some printers don't want that, so you can turn that off. But if you uncheck bleed, then all of the images that we had go out beyond the bounds of our page will get cropped right up to the page. Some printers also like to include printer's marks, and if this is something that I'm printing and then trimming myself, I find having crop marks is really, really helpful, because then I can see exactly where I need to cut without having to use the edge of the graphics as a reference for the ruler. I'm going to go ahead and turn those off, though, for now. And then the last option is embed fonts, and I'm going to click this and change it to text as curves. There are a lot of fonts that you can go ahead and embed into a PDF, but there are also fonts that, due to licensing issues, you can't embed in a PDF. And so when you send that PDF off to somebody and they open it up, they'll get different fonts than what you intended. The safest way to avoid that is to go ahead and just convert all of your text to curves, and that's what this embed fonts as text as curves does. It'll no longer be readable text in the PDF, but if we're just sending this to print, that's not an issue. It would really be more of an issue for a digital version. In that case, you'd want to make sure that your fonts are embedded and that they are working after you export. All right, with all of that set up, I'm going to go ahead and click Export, and I'm going to go ahead and save it right next to my Publisher tutorial. We'll just call this the export and click Save. I'm going to switch over to Finder and click on this Export PDF we just made. I'm going to do spacebar to preview, and we can see that everything looks as it should. We've got our fonts, we've got our colors, all the images are there, and we'll go back over to Publisher. And the final thing we need to do is package the document. Packaging basically takes all of our fonts and images and everything else and puts it into a single folder for archiving. So if I go to open this later, 10 years from now, and I don't know where all the images are, everything should all be together for us. So let's go up to File, going to Save as Package. None are modified. Let's go into fonts. We can see everything is checked, which is great. All of our images are checked. Go ahead and click OK. And we'll go ahead and package this here. And we'll just save over the earlier package that I had. That wraps up our tutorial on Affinity Publisher. You should have a good understanding of the basics now and be ready to go ahead and start implementing Publisher in your own print and digital projects. As always, if you find this video helpful, if you learned something from it, it really helps us out if you like the video. And if you want to see more stuff like this, make sure to subscribe and set up notifications. That way you get new tutorials like this as soon as they come out. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew, and I'll see you in the next one.